Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Western Suburbs podcast. This is Joshua Welge. I'm joined here by Joel Boenitz. We're here taping on Tuesday afternoon, coming off another very exciting high school football Friday, week 2. Joel, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm excited for week 3. Obviously, this week marks the start of some conference play across the Western Suburbs area, and I'm really excited to see how some of these teams play against some conference rivals.
Yeah, you're right. Some of the really power conferences, like the Duquesne Conference, the West Suburban Conference, they're starting to enter in conference play this week. So a lot of fun matchups that we'll dive into later in the podcast. But before we get into that, I wanted to kind of review week 2 because there's a lot of great games that we wanted to talk about. As we're taping here on Tuesday, want to remind everybody of some of the content that we have on Friday Night Drive. We have namely Steve Soucie released our updated Friday Night Drive power rankings. So, everybody want to check that out. Tomorrow, Steve will be dropping his updated playoff projections. So, a lot of good stuff out there right now. When I looked at Steve's power rankings, one of the things that jumped out, a new entry that people want to see is Oswego. Oswego coming off of, for my money, maybe the most notable win in the Western Suburbs last Friday. They beat Joliet Catholic 17-0. It's a matchup that, Joel, when I saw it came out in the summer, I'm like, "Ooh, that's kind of an interesting one." Those two teams don't match up in a while. Well, they hadn't matched up in a while. It had actually been 35 years since they'd seen each other on the football field. The last time they had played, they were in the Class 4A playoffs. That was when there was 6 classes in Illinois. Now there's 8 classes. So it'd been in quite a while, and I was just kind of wondering how Oswego can match up with Joliet Catholic. I know Oswego has a really good program; they have a really good team. But I mean, man, Joliet Catholic they're one of the blue bloods in high school football, and also, of course, the defending 5A state runner-up. But man, Oswego really took it to them. Aiden Villa ran for over 100 yards, ran for a big 64-yard touchdown run. Oswego got off to a good start. I think they led 17-0 at halftime of that game, and the defense did the rest because the defense usually does the rest for Oswego. They have a tremendous defense led by their 3 linebackers, senior Carson Cooney going to Iowa, Mikey Claycomb, another senior, and Easton Ruby. It's funny. They wear numbers 4, 5, and 6. So I'm kind of doing my notebook on those guys this week for the Kendall County record, but just kind of want to get a little bit more background on that. But so you can't miss those guys on the field, and they lead them. It all starts with that defense. It's a defense that only gave up 70 points in the regular season last year. It's a defense that held Neuqua Valley to 7 points in week 1, but then they take it to another level, I think, to be able to shut out Joliet Catholic. That was a very impressive and frankly an eye-opening win for us. So we go in week 2.
Yeah, it certainly seems like, yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm not, really well known around, the blue bloods in the Illinois area, but especially when you knock off a team that's considered a blue blood early on in the season, it's definitely going to be a confidence booster heading into the latter half of the season.
No doubt. I mean, it sets Oswego up well. I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, but they're going to be favored in pretty much every game from here on out. They're looking at the potential 9-0 record and a really good seed going into playoffs. But again, get ahead of ourselves there. But a great win for them last Friday, beating Joliet Catholic. We mentioned some of the conferences that start conference play this week. The Duquesne Conference, notably. I looked before that we jumped on. 6 out of their 8 teams are 2-0 through 2 weeks. You got to see one of them last Friday, Batavia. Very impressive win over South Elgin.
Yeah, definitely a big win. I mean, it was the first time that they were facing the Storm since their last season in the Upstate 8 back in 2017. That matchup ended up being a 10-7 victory for Batavia, but it was surely a different turnout this time around. I talked to Bodie Anderson after the game, and he was talking about how much of a learning game this game against South Elgin was supposed to be, and boy, did it look like he learned a lot. I mean, he started off the game a little bit shaky, but after he found Isaiah Brown for a 57-yard touchdown, I mean, he just looked a lot more confident in the pocket. He ended up finishing with 10 of 14 with 155 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it was just an offensive explosion for Batavia. Something that was a little bit lacking in that week 1 matchup against Glenbard West, they just kind of laid it out on South Elgin, and that starters were all out by the second half. So it was another blowout win that I got to saw in person. And I've only seen 3/4 of starters so far in my first 2 games of Illinois football. So it's definitely been it was definitely great to see, and it was great to be around the Batavia atmosphere for the first time. Obviously, I'd heard a whole lot about it, but to see it in person was definitely interesting.
Yeah, Batavia is one of those towns that really get behind their football team. I mean, I know they're in the suburbs, but sometimes I feel like I get sort of a small town feel when I'm at a Batavia football game because the whole community just really comes out and rallies around their football program, and it's a great football program. So, good win for Batavia. Their neighbor rival Geneva, they were able to roll as well, so they're 2-0. Another conference rival that's 2-0 as well, but pretty tight games is Wheaton North. I mean, Wheaton North week 1, they beat Providence on the last play of the game, and then last Friday they beat Lockport 22-21. Shane Derricks caught a 2-point conversion from their quarterback Nick Johnson. Shane Derricks also scored the winning touchdown in week 1. He's a two-way player. He plays defense as well. So, Wheaton North, I mean, on the one hand, they could easily be 0-2, but being 2-1 or being 2-0 and beating 2 very quality non-conference opponents in Providence and Lockport, they got to be feeling pretty good about themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Wheaton North is one of those teams where, everybody was questioning how they were going to look after last season. I mean, they lost Max Hauser, their starting quarterback, Walter Owens at running back, and then, of course, Mac Puzaj at wide receiver. It's 3 great players for them that led them consistently. And, to see that they are able to pull out some from behind wins, both in week 1 and week 2, certainly got to be a big confidence booster heading into Duquesne Conference play with a 2-0 record, especially considering the doubts that some people have had, with them prior to the season. I mean, Steve Soucie had them projected not to make it into the playoffs, but, it's looking like a good sign for the Falcons heading into Duquesne Conference play.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you mentioned teams that people maybe wondered about, maybe had some doubts about going in. I look at Kaneland. I really didn't know what to expect about Kaneland, losing a 4-year starting quarterback, losing a 4-year wide receiver. They're 2-0, and also Marmion with the new head coach Adam Guerra, they're 2-0 as well. I mean, Kaneland and Marmion have to be feeling pretty good about themselves right now. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
for Kaneland, it's mainly been thanks to the leg that they have behind them and Sam Bruno. I mean, last week against Wakanda, it was, they scored on the first drive of the game, and then they didn't score besides all of the kicks from Bruno. Yeah, I mean, he had 3 field goals. All were within 30 yards of each other, but, that ended up being the difference for them in winning that game. And whichever way gets them the win, surely it helps with them. And then in Marmion's case, had a very similar situation from Batavia, or a very similar situation like Batavia in week 1 against Oak Forest. They scored 21 points unanswered in the 3rd quarter to secure a 21-15 victory. And then in week 2 against the Noble Academy, 56-0 win. I mean, pretty much dominant from the start. So it's pretty great to see that the Cadets are looking pretty well under Guerra after losing Dan Thorpe, who is, of course, the head coach there for the past 19 seasons. So they're looking pretty solid so far, and it's heavily thanks to a lot of senior leadership from what Guerra has told me.
Yeah, Marmion and Kaneland, for that matter, doing a good job of stacking 2 wins back-to-back in the first weeks because they're both going to need it because Marmion's going to go into CCL, ESCC play, and that's just going to be a dogfight week in and week out just to get a win every week. And Kaneland, I mean, the Interstate 8 is no joke, too, when you're talking about, the likes of Morris and Sycamore and teams like that. But nevertheless, very good starts for both of those programs. They have to be feeling pretty good about themselves right now. Another program that has to be feeling pretty good themselves, I got to see for the first time last Friday, was York. York with a new head coach, Don Gelsomino, who was their defense coordinator for the last 4 years and did a great job there. They're off to a really nice start, 2-0. They beat Plainfield North last Friday, 35-13. Really a game that final score doesn't really do it justice because York, they scored 35 points at the half, and then they pulled their starting quarterback, senior Bruno Massel, in the second half. And, I kind of feel like it's one of those games where they're like, all right, we're up big. We're just going to kind of coast there. Not that they wanted to, but, when you take out your starting quarterback, things kind of change a little bit. But Bruno Massel was very impressive. He was a kid that last year was more of a running quarterback as a backup. They brought him in as, one of those guys that bring him in for certain packages for running plays and things like that. He actually ran for 4 touchdowns as a backup to Sean Winton last year. And then he was a really good track kid as well. He's a kid that was on a medalist 4x1 relay, 3-time state qualifier. He's been a qualifier in the 100-meter dash. I think he runs 100 in like 10.87, which, Joel, I think that's pretty good, right? You're a track guy. I think
it's pretty solid. Yeah.
Pretty good. So, I mean, he's known as a runner, but he really, he could put it on there with the passes on Friday. He had some really big third down conversions, which I thought was very impressive. They have a 6'7" junior tight end, Hunter Stepanich, that people are going to want to keep an eye on. He's a kid to watch not only this year, but next. But and then in addition to that, they have a great defense. I mean, Don Gelsomino, their coach, was their defense coordinator before that. So they really hang their head on defense. Joe Reif, their defensive lineman, is going to Notre Dame. He plays on offense as well. They have some good linebackers as well. Henry Duda, their running back, ran for 169 yards and a couple touchdowns. So a very impressive week 2 win for York, and feeling pretty good about themselves going into conference play. Maybe not this week. I think next week they start West Suburban Silver plays. So York, a good win last Friday. And, that one of their conference rivals, Lyons Township, got a very nice win going into Wheaton South and beating Wheaton Warrenville South. Lyons Township's head coach, John Butcher, of course, was a great player for Wheaton South, quarterback back in the late 90s. This is his first time coaching back in Wheaton as a head coach for Lyons, and good win for them. Notably, Travis Stam, their senior wide receiver going to Illinois State, he set the career receptions record for Lyons Township in that game. So he's had a great year. I believe he's a 4-year varsity player. He's definitely 3-year varsity, but he's been a very good player for them, the last few years. But good win for Lyons. And then across town, Nazareth. I was kind of wondering how they do against Kenwood after a really close game against Kankakee. I thought it was going to be a really close game, and it was definitely not a close game because they were up by the 40-point rule early in the second half. Logan Malachek, their really good quarterback, he threw for 6 touchdowns in the first half, which that's a pretty good game. That's a pretty good few games, and he did it in one half. So a great game for him, and a good win for Nazareth as they head into conference play. Anything else from week 2 that jumped out to you?
I think it was just overall a pretty interesting week, just across the games that, were covered on my end. I mean, you had some games that kind of followed the similar rule from week 1. Obviously, teams like Geneva kind of blowing out their opponents once again. But you also had a couple of turnarounds on some of these teams. I mean, St. Charles North got a good win against Crete Monet. I think the final score was like 52-30 or something like that. Something pretty big and pretty notable. Good offensive lots of good offensive efforts on my end. That's one big thing that I realized from week 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So yeah, let's jump into week 3, shall we? We mentioned earlier that conference play starts this week for some of these leagues, namely the Duquesne Conference. Game that you're going to be on Friday. I'm interested to see that one. Wheaton Warrenville South and Geneva. Wheaton South coming off of a close loss against Lyons Township. Geneva, of course, is 2-0. Haven't really been tested so far. I think they're going to get tested Friday at Wheaton South. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a big test for Geneva. The first true test, I believe, for them this year. I mean, you kind of mentioned it there. Wheaton Warrenville South is obviously, a very tough opponent. They have one of the only 3 losses that Duquesne Conference teams have heading into conference play. I mean, overall, a 13-3 record, which is, I think, the best record they've had since 2021, when Wheaton North actually went on to win the state championship, the only team from the Duquesne Conference to win the state championship. But no, I think it's obviously going to be a big game overall. Obviously, Wheaton Warrenville South's lost last week. It was against a quality opponent, which all three losses were against quality opponents. But I mean, they showed in week one that they are able to play up to competition with their win against Glenbard South. So it'll be interesting to see if they can do it again against a team like Geneva, who have obviously, shown out in the past game. I mean, Tony Chihino has 9 touchdowns already so far this season in 5 quarters of play. Talon Taylor is already over 250 reception yards and 5 touchdowns. It's just going to be a really good matchup, and I'm excited to see how both teams play.
Yeah, some really good receivers in that game. Talon Taylor, obviously, but Amari Williams for Wheaton South. He's a track guy. I'm not. He's going somewhere for football, I believe. I'm not quite certain, but I do know that he's a very good track guy as well.
He's going to Northern Illinois, the ranked Northern Illinois.
There you go. Yeah, I've known that this week especially. Going to NIU again. I think you were there for track. He medals pretty high, if not win state last spring, if I'm not mistaken.
He won state in the 300-meter hurdles last week, or not last week, last spring. So he's definitely a fast kid.
So a couple really good receivers in that game between Talon Taylor and Amari Williams. It should be a fun one. Another fun one, obviously, St. Charles North, Wheaton North again. They've had a couple really close ones. That match between those two teams have been really good the last few years. What do you think about that one as you look at those two teams?
Yeah, I think it's going to be another close matchup this year around. I mean, if anything, or if, these past couple of weeks for St. Charles North has said anything, it's that they're a very similar team to what they were last year. A close one against Palatine, and then a pretty more resounding win against Crete Monet. I mean, that's happened in each of the past 2 seasons. But obviously, this is going to be a big test for Wheaton North's new team that obviously has some players that are, not as much of a new face on the roster as they were when they started in week 1. But this is going to be their first really true test, I believe, for them. So I believe this is going to be another really close game between the two teams, and I'm really interested to see how that plays out.
So maybe the marquee matchup certainly in the Western Suburbs, maybe in the state on Friday, Nazareth, defending 5A state champion, going to Mount Carmel, defending 7A state champion. Man, I'm excited just thinking about that matchup. Welge, our colleague, is going to be there for Friday Night Drive. It's a matchup that, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the last time they faced each other was I believe it was JJ McCarthy's last game as a Nazareth quarterback, his junior year. But man, I mean, when you're talking about some of the talent, just at quarterback of those two teams, between Mount Carmel's quarterback, who I'm drawing a blank on, but he's a very talented kid, and then Logan Malachek as well. So that should be, man, that's going to be one on a Friday night. I'm just kind of following along to see, what's going on. And certainly it's the big matchup, I think, in the Catholic League as well. Do you have any kind of thoughts from a distance on that one?
I think it's just going to be a really good matchup. I mean, obviously you mentioned it. This is going to be a matchup between two, state champions from a year ago. And I mean, even though Mount Carmel was coming in at 1-1, their one loss was a very high quality loss against a quality team. Oh, great. But no, it's obviously going to be a really good matchup between these two teams. I'm so sorry.
Your dog agrees. I think anybody agrees. I think any person agree, any dog would agree, any cat would agree, any bird. So it's going to be a fun one on Friday. Nazareth's playing Mount Carmel. You mentioned Mount Carmel as a loss, but that Hunt school is basically, you're talking about almost like a junior college that they're playing with the Hunt schools. So that should be a good one. Good kind of measuring stick about where Nazareth is at. I mean, they had a nice win over Kankakee. They blew out Kenwood. But Mount Carmel, that's going to be a test on Friday going to their place. another game, the game that I'm going to be on Friday, Plano at Sandwich. For people that don't know about the rivalry, well, they've only been playing, Joel, since 1897. This is going to be the 113th matchup between the rivals. They called, the War on 34, Route 34, I'm speaking of. Again, this will be the 113th meeting between the rivals. Sandwich currently holds a 56-52 advantage. There's been 4 ties. Sandwich last year beat them 20-7. Sandwich, of course, went all the way on to the Class 4A quarterfinals in a really great season for Sandwich. One of the better stories in the area. Sandwich, getting back to the playoffs. Sandwich is 0-2 though this year, and probably a little bit of a sense of urgency on their side because I will say that they had a very difficult first 2 weeks. They lost to Manteno in week 1. Coincidentally, Plano lost to Manteno in week 2, and then Sandwich lost to Wilmington, defending 2A state champion in week 2. So again, a little bit of a sense of urgency on the Plano side. Matchup like this, though, rivalry, there's always a sense of urgency. I mean, this is a kind of game that both towns come out, everybody's talking about. They've probably been talking about it all the way growing up, and they're going to be talking about it when they're 40 or 50 years old about, remember when that 2024 game and remember when that happened and, stuff like that. I mean, this is a matchup that everybody talks about around the community. And we'll see. I don't really know what to make of this, especially with Sandwich being 0-2. Sandwich, I do know that they're really good running backs. Simeon Harris, who ran for over 1,400 yards last year, he's had a tough start. I think he has not been over 100 yards in either of the 2 games, and really has been held down. And they've really struggled to really get him going. I will say that 2 of their starting offensive linemen, I believe, are hurt right now. They're also they're 2 top tacklers from last year. They both were injured during the offseason, and I don't know if either of them are going to be back this season. So that's been a big loss for Sandwich, losing both of those guys. On the Plano side, their new head coach, Kyle Tutt, he came from Streeter, which they have a really long-standing rivalry as well. Streeter plays Ottawa. So this will be his first taste of Plano Sandwich. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Should be a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a rivalry game is always a very important one, and it's always going to be circled, especially if it's, as long-standing as, you kind of mentioned since 1897. So who knows? This could be the game, or this could be, a really close game, or it could finally be a game for one of these players to kind of, burst onto the scene and, finally make that jump that they always wanted.
Yeah, no, it should be a going on, and frankly, it's an important one. I mean, one of them's 0-2, the other one's 1-1. They got some tough Kishwaukee River Conference games ahead against teams like Marengo and Richmond Burden. So they really need it. I mean, both of them really need a win, and particularly Sandwich being 0-2. So we'll see. It should be a fun one Friday. Another conference rivalry game. Glenbard West is playing at Downers Grove North on Friday. Glenbard West, of course, they are 0-2 now. Losses to Batavia and Loyola. No shame on either of those losses, but nonetheless, they're 0-2. And also notably, their star running back, Tayon Oriento, who hurt his hand week 1. He did not play in week 2. Don't know the status of how long he might be out, but it sure looks like an injury that he might be out for a little bit. I mean, his hand was bandaged up pretty good on the sidelines last week, but they go to Downers North, and Downers North is rolling. They're 2-0 right now. They've had 2 very big wins over O'Fallon and Downers Grove South. They have their great quarterback, Owen Lance, who is going to Minnesota. They have a great defense as well. I don't know if they've allowed a point in 2 games. They only allowed either 4 or 5 first downs against Downers Grove South. Either way, very few first downs, let's put it that way. But I mean, Downers Grove South or Downers Grove North last year, they beat Glenbard West for the first time since 2006, I believe. That was a kind of a watershed win for that program and that team, and kind of boosted them. And then, of course, they got all the way to the Class 7A state championship game. But it was kind of a surprise when they beat Glenbard West last year. I'm not going to be surprised if they win Friday night because it's at their place. I think Glenbard West is a little bit wounded right now, down their running back. And Downers North is feeling good about themselves. But nonetheless, Glenbard West, sometimes when a team's 0-2 and they're struggling, that's when they get a little dangerous because they know the significance of things. But anyway, it should be a very good game on Friday night.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it over these past couple of weeks. I mean, Glenbard West's first three games are pretty much a gauntlet over or against, like you mentioned, three teams that are within the top 10 of our rankings. I mean, obviously, Batavia is at number 8, Downers Grove North is at number 7, and Loyola is at number 3, I believe now. But obviously, this is going to be a really important game for them and also for Downers Grove North because, like you kind of mentioned, um, you know, last year was the first time they had defeated Glenbard West since 2006. So now, with the momentum rolling a little bit, it may be time that they're thinking maybe it's our time to start our own little streak against them. So definitely going to be really interesting to see how both teams play.
Yeah, and Downers North, I think they're definitely one of the favorites in that conference. I mean, some might call them the favorite in the conference with some of the kids coming back, but a win over Glenbard West would be a great way to start conference play. Joel, before we get out of here, any other games this Friday that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think there's one other game that I believe from Duquesne Conference that's going to be really interesting. Obviously, we kind of mentioned how there were 6 teams that are heading into conference play at 2-0. We mentioned one of the battles between 2-0 teams in St. Charles North and Wheaton North. Another one that I think is going to be shocking and also a really good game, Batavia and Lake Park. I mean, obviously Batavia, kind of coming behind with the losses of, Ryan Bowe, Luke Alwyn, and Charles Wellplay. They've been playing really well in their first 2 games. Lake Park has been playing really well as well. I mean, their big strength has been the running game in their first 2 games. They're averaging 268 rushing yards a game in their first 2 games. I mean, they have basically a dual-headed dragon in Anthony Oristano and Robert Munaco in the backfield, and it's been working really well for them. They have 72 points under their name right now. And, it's one of those teams that I kind of suspected could be a shock in the Duquesne Conference this year, and they've been proving it so far. So it'll be interesting to see how they'll face off against a Batavia defense that has proven that they can go against the run. I mean, you kind of mentioned it, in their week 1 game against Glenbard West, where they faced a really talented running back in Terrion Oriental. They've limited him to under 60 yards. So it'll be interesting to see how they'll face off against not just one, but 2 high quality running backs in their first game of Duquesne Conference play this year.
Yeah, Lake Park was a team that they got really close to the playoffs last year. They were 4-5. They did not qualify. But yeah, I mean, they're 2-0, 2 pretty impressive wins, or 2 very one-sided wins. Let's put it that way. They beat Conant, they beat Bartlett, but let's just say that they're going to step up in class just a little bit the next 2 weeks when they play Batavia and Geneva back to back. But you can't take away from what they've been able to accomplish so far. And when you play in a team like in a league like the Duquesne, you really need to kind of stack those wins when you can. And they've been able to stack them. And now we're going to see how they can stack up against some really good teams. But yeah, that will be a game I'm kind of interested to watch, not only about who wins, because I think Batavia win, but just how close can Lake Park play them? I mean, have they got a little bit better to where they can hang in there, or are they still, definitely way down on the pecking order in Duquesne? No, that should be interesting to watch. I mean, a lot of interesting 2-0 teams. Glenmar North is 2-0 as well. In the Catholic League, Montini is 2-0. St. Francis is 2-0. They both have 2 very difficult road games this week. Montini is going to Marist. St. Francis is going to Loyola. A game being played on Friday night. Loyola just got lights. This would be their first Friday night game at Loyola. So kind of a notable matchup there. St. Francis playing at Loyola. A lot of good stuff this coming weekend. A lot of good stuff on Friday Night Drive. You want to tune in. I'm going to be back here tomorrow on Wednesday with Steve Soucie as we look ahead to some of the top week 3 games in the state. We will have all of our previews coming in every market that Shaw Local covers. And then, of course, Friday night, we'll be back at it, covering a ton of games. I will be in Plano, covering Sandwich and Plano. Joe will be covering Wheaton, Warrenville South, and Geneva, but we'll be covering a lot more. Of course, we'll be having our live stream as well from 9:30 to 11. You're going to want to join Steve Soucie and Matt Rodewald as they break down all the matchups around the state and what it means. So before we get out of here, Joel, anything else you want to talk about?
No, I'm just really excited to see how these teams play in conference play. I mean, obviously, I've heard so much about it heading into, with this job basically. So it'll be really interesting to see it with my own eyes this week.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Thanks again for everybody for joining us. Again, this is Josh Welge along with Joel Boenitz. Have a good Tuesday.